As we watch cities burn and riots and looting get out of control, and the left constantly talk about how we need to tone down the rhetoric, we watch here as Governor Cuomo says Trump had better have an army to protect him if he comes to New York City. So we are lectured by the left constantly about rhetoric, about how Trump says things he shouldn't say, how he should say things in a different tone. But at the same time, we have the governor of New York State literally saying that the president of the United States is not welcome in New York City, and if he decides to come, he needs to come with an army to protect himself. I am the Millennial Conservative. This is my YouTube channel. You can check me out on Twitter at millennial_C0N, Millennial Con, and you can check out my Facebook page at Millennial Conservative. So what you have here is the governor of New York State saying Wednesday he all but threatened President Trump's safety if he returns to New York City in a rant, responding to an exclusive story by the Post that Trump is looking to pull federal funds from lawless cities, including New York. So the president is going to start to clamp down on these lawless cities, who are cities that are essentially letting this violence take place. We watched in New York City back in, I believe it was May, early June, as looters and rioters went up and down Fifth Ave in New York City and went to store after store, looting and rioting, stealing millions of dollars worth of merchandise from these stores. Since then, the stores have become boarded up, and we are actually seeing an exodus from New York City as people are fleeing by the hundreds, if not thousands, to get out of the city. Yet Cuomo has to find the time to go after the president. It says here, Cuomo called an emergency press briefing within an hour on Wednesday night to tear into Trump for the order, which cites New York's rising murder rate and defunding of the NYPD. Quote, he better have an army if he thinks he's going to walk down the street in New York. New Yorkers don't want to have anything to do with him, the Democrat said, all but threatening the commander-in-chief. So this is the actual video here of what he had to say.
He can't come back to New York. He can't. He's going to walk down the street in New York? Forget bodyguards. He better have an army if he thinks he's going to walk down the street in New York.
From the point of view of New York City, this has been the worst president in history. Look, the best thing he did for New York City was leave. Good riddance. Let him go to Florida. Be careful not to get COVID.
He can't come back to New York.
So like we were saying, the city of New York is in shambles, and Governor Cuomo is more worried about bashing the president than trying to work with the president to possibly get some sort of funding to help rebuild the city that him and de Blasio destroyed. Says, but Cuomo, who like Trump hails from Queens, wasn't done. Says, quote, he can't have enough bodyguards to walk through New York City. People don't want to have anything to do with him. You have
to find a testing site.
You have the governor of New York essentially issuing threats to the president of the United States. And if that's not enough, you have the mayor of New York getting in on the threatening mantra as well. It says, see in court. That was Mayor Bill de Blasio's response on Thursday to President Trump's ordering the federal government to find ways to defund New York City for defunding the police department. So we're watching, again, as these cities are defunding the police department and they're giving free rein to rioters and looters. And the president is finally saying he's had enough. You know, he's not jumping in and deploying federal forces. He's not invoking the Insurrection Act, and he's not doing any sort of, physical or military response. He's going to go ahead and say, look, you guys want to destroy your cities? It's not up to the rest of the tax-paying citizens of this country to put your cities back together when you guys laid the groundwork for the destruction of your own cities. And like I was saying, New York City, there's a mass exodus coming out of New York City. And this right here is why there is such an exodus out of New York City. It says the mayor began his daily press briefing by taking shots at the president, who on Wednesday signed a memo to look into how to pull federal funding to the Big Apple, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and Portland. Cities, he says, have devolved into lawless zones. Quote, if you persist in trying to deny the funding that's keeping New York City going in the middle of this crisis, we will see you in court, de Blasio said. And once again, we will beat you in court. There's another thing that people fail to realize here, and it has to do with the idea of federal funding. If we were not beholden to the federal government to begin with, and we were allowed to keep our funding, to keep our tax dollars and our funds within the state, within our cities, within our localities, and we didn't have to give it all to the federal government and beg to get anything back, then de Blasio and Cuomo would not even have a leg to stand on. You know, they destroyed their own state and city. They probably bring in some of the highest tax revenues in the country, and they squandered all of it on social programs and on all kinds of other nonsense that did nothing to actually support the workings of the municipalities, the cities, and the counties within the state. They did nothing. The onus is on the local leadership or lack thereof when it comes to situations like this. It's not on Trump and it's not on the federal government, but if they want to destroy their cities and localities and then bash the president and threaten him in the process, I hope he cuts all the federal funding and lets them figure out how to fix the problems that happened as a result of their actions.